Tallis Ironmore had ended 3 wars and buried 2 brothers. And in all of it, he had never once forgotten how to breathe. He forgot now. The Parley Hall at Greywater had been raised to hold 100 wolves without an echo, and still the hush that fell over it had weight. It pressed against the ears. Every alpha of the 7 packs, and every envoy sworn to them, turned toward the tall doors at the far end of the chamber, because through those doors came the one guest no wolf had ever expected to watch cross a wolf threshold, in peace. The Dragon King of Cauldrift had come to the table. Oren Vilespire walked as though the floor beneath him were a courtesy he had agreed to permit. He was not so much taller than the wolves who lined the aisle, and yet he filled more of the room than any measure of him could explain, the way a fire fills more of a house than the hearth that holds it. Where his boots came down, the frost that had crept under the doors softened to dark, wet stone, and the wolves nearest the aisle leaned away from him without seeming to know it. Tallis did not look long at the Dragon King. He was looking at the woman who walked at the Dragon King's side. She wore gold. Not gilt and not thread of gold, but the true deep color of the metal. A gown, the shade of afternoon light in the last hour before it fails, and it made her skin seem lit from somewhere beneath. Her dark hair had been bound back in a way that hid nothing of her face, and that was the cruelty of it, for Tallis knew that face. He had known it, half-starved, under the gray hood of the under kitchens. He had known it lowered, always lowered, schooled by long years, to take up no more of the world than a person could manage. It was not lowered now. She found his eyes across the whole length of the hall, the way one equal finds another, and the banked gold of her gaze did not so much as flicker, and Tallis Ironmore, Alpha King of Ilmar, and the strongest wolf north of the Greywater, felt the air leave him as though a hand had closed slowly around his chest. Neris! He had not meant to say it aloud. The name fell out of him, like something dropped on stone. She tilted her head the smallest degree, the courtesy that one sovereign grants another and not the width of a hair beyond it, and then she looked away from him as though he were a face in a crowd she could not quite trouble herself to place. Around Tallis the hall began slowly to murmur. He heard none of it. He was doing arithmetic that would not come right, because the last time he had seen this woman, she had owned nothing at all, and now she stood clothed in a rival king's colors. And every soul in the north was about to learn that the Alpha of Ilmar had once held the whole of her in his 2 hands and had let her go. To understand how a discarded kitchen girl came to stand crowned in the colors of Cauldrift, and how the strongest wolf in the north came to forget the plain animal work of drawing breath, you have to go back one winter to the night of the choosing. One winter before the parley at Greywater, Neris had owned nothing in the world but a good pair of hands, and a hope she had never once been foolish enough to say aloud. She had come to Dunhollow as an infant left at the gate, in a season no one liked to talk about, and the keep had raised her the way a keep raises such children, which is to say, it fed her enough, named her little, and expected her to be grateful and quiet and useful. She carried water, she mended what tore, and for the better part of 2 years she had carried something heavier and quieter than water, the unspoken thing that lay between her and the young Alpha King. It had never been spoken, because speaking it would have made it real, and real things could be taken away, but it had been there. In the long evenings, when Tallis Ironmore could not sleep for the weight of his crown, and came down to the kitchens where no one thought to look for a king. In the way he saved the harder questions for her, as though her plain sense were worth more to him than the counsel of graybeards. In the once, only the once, that he had taken her hand in the dark of the cold stores, and held it as though it were the single steady thing in a world that would not hold still. So, when the choosing came, the whole of Dunhollow believed it already knew the ending. The choosing was held on the longest night, when the moon sat fat and white and low over the towers, and an Alpha King was bound by the oldest law of the packs to stand before his people and name the Luna who would rule at his side. And Neris, who had been given a place near the back among the household staff where she belonged, stood with her rough hands folded and her heart beating so hard, she was certain the wolf beside her could hear it. Tallis rose. The hall stilled. He was pale, she noticed, paler than a bridegroom ought to be, and there was something in the set of his jaw she had seen only before battle. She thought, in her foolishness, that it was feeling. She thought it was for her. "I name as Luna of Ilmar," he said, and his voice did not carry the way it did on a field. It came out low and rough and hard. "Marin of the Ashgrove line." For the space of one breath, Nerys did not understand the words. They were plain words. She simply could not make them fit the shape of the life she had allowed herself to imagine. Then Marin Ashgrove stepped from among the high families in a gown the color of new snow, beautiful and startled and rightful, and the hall broke into the roar a pack makes for its Luna. And Nerys understood all at once and completely, the way you understand cold water when you have already gone under. She did not weep. That was the one mercy her whole starved and careful life had trained into her. She had spent so many years making herself small that when the worst of it came, she knew exactly how to stand, hands folded, face still, taking up nothing at all, so that not one wolf in that roaring hall turned to see how the kitchen girl was taking the news. She looked at Tallis only once. He was already looking at her, and whatever was in his face, then, grief or shame or something, she had no name for, she did not stay to read it. She turned, and she walked out of the warm and roaring hall into the dark, and she kept walking, past the gates, past the last torch, out under the white moon and into the black line of the winter forest. And she did not once look back at the only home she had ever been given. She had gone perhaps 1,000 paces into the trees, far enough that the noise of the celebration had thinned to nothing, and the only sound was her own breath tearing in and out of her when she felt it. Warmth. Here, in the deep of a winter wood, where the snow lay blue in the moonlight and her own fingers had gone numb inside her sleeves, something ahead of her in the dark was giving off heat like a banked forge. She stopped. The cold air shimmered faintly above the snow, the way it shimmers over a summer road. And in the black, between two trees, low and steady and patient, a pair of eyes opened and caught the moon, and they burned the deep red of coals that have been kept alive all night against the cold. Nerys did not run. She had spent her whole life being quiet in the presence of things stronger than herself, and quiet was the only defense she had ever been allowed. So she stood very still in the blue snow and watched the coal-red eyes watch her back. The heat resolved into a shape, a man, or the shape of one, tall and unhurried, stepping out from between the trees, with the snow hissing faintly into steam where it met the hem of his dark coat. He was not dressed for the cold, and did not appear to feel it. Frost would not settle on him. When he came near enough for the moon to find his face, she saw that he was neither old nor young, that his skin held the same faint underlit warmth she would later come to know in her own, and that he was looking at her with an attention so complete and so unafraid that it frightened her more than the eyes had. Wolves looked at her and saw a servant. This creature looked at her and saw something else entirely, and did not trouble to hide that he had found it interesting. "You are a long way from the fires," he said. His voice was low and had embers in it. "And you are not weeping. That is unusual. Most who walk out of that hall tonight will be weeping over one thing or another before morning." "I have nothing left in there to weep for," Nerys said, and was surprised to find it steady and true. Something moved across his face that might, on a warmer man, have been the beginning of respect. "No," he agreed. "I do not think you do." He tilted his head, and the coal light in his eyes banked and flared. "Do you know what I am, Wolf?" She did. Every child in Ilmar was raised on the shape of the fear, even if they never once saw the thing itself. The old enemy across the burnt marches, the sovereign of Caldrift, whose line the packs had warred against, and made peace with, and warred against again for longer than any wolf kept count. She had simply never once imagined that the fear would wear a face, or stand in her snow, or speak to her as though she mattered. "You are the Dragon King," she said. "I am Orin," he said, as though the two things were not the same, as though the crown were the smaller part of him. "And you are the girl the Alpha of Ilmar threw into the snow tonight in front of the 7 packs." He said it without cruelty, which was somehow worse than if he had laughed. "Tell me your name, Neris." Neris. He turned it over the way a man turns a coin to see if it is true metal. "They told you what you were in that keep. They told you, and you believed them. Because a child believes the only voices it is given." He stepped closer, and the heat of him rolled over her, and it was not unpleasant. It was the first warmth she had felt in hours. "They were wrong about you. I knew it the moment the wind changed and carried you out of that hall. You do not smell of wolf, Neris. Not only of wolf. I do not know what that means," she whispered. "No," he said gently. "You would not. It has been kept asleep in you a very long time, and I think it went to sleep long before you were ever left at that gate." He lowered his voice, and the embers in his eyes went very steady. "But it is waking now. It woke the moment you stopped making yourself small. I was ranging my own borders tonight, and even a full league away I felt it happen. That is why I came." "That is not possible," Neris said. But even as the words left her, she pressed her numb hand flat against the center of her chest, because beneath her ribs, beneath the cold and the grief and the ordinary hammering of her heart, something had begun, very slowly, to grow warm. Not warm the way a body is warm, warm the way a coal is warm under gray ash, the kind of heat that has been waiting a long while for a breath of air, the kind that does not go out once it has caught. She felt it turn over inside her like a thing waking from a long sleep and testing whether it still had the strength to rise. Her skin, where her palm pressed against it, had gone hot enough that the cold air stung around the edges of her hand. Aren watched her feel it. He did not look surprised. He looked, if anything, sorry. "You feel it now. I had hoped you might have one more day of not knowing. It would have been kinder." He held out one hand, and the snow between them steamed. "Come to Caldrift, Neris. Whatever you are, it is stronger than the story you were raised on, and it is done waiting, and if no one teaches you to carry it, it will not stay quiet, and it will not stay small, and it will not care in the least whether it burns you to the ground on its way out." Neris stared at the offered hand, and at the heat rising off the snow, and at the coal of her own chest that no wolf had ever once told her lived there, and she understood that whatever door had opened in her tonight, there was no way left in the world to close it again. Caldrift was not what the stories had promised. Neris had been raised to picture the dragon realm as a burnt waste, a place of ash and screaming and bare black rock, because that is how a frightened people describes the home of its oldest enemy. What she found instead, after a night and a day riding east with the Dragon King and his silent riders, was a city built into the warm flank of a mountain that never fully froze, where hot springs steamed in stone courtyards beneath the snow, and the people went bareheaded in the cold and looked at her, a wolf brought among them. With a wary curiosity that was not so very different from fear, that was the first gap she felt, and it did not close. Among the wolves, she had been too low to be seen at all. Among the dragons, she was seen far too well, a lone gray wolf walking their gold halls, the creature their grandmothers had taught them to dread, and she felt every eye that followed her, and understood that she now belonged to no place on earth, not the keep that had thrown her out, and not the mountain that had taken her in. The second gap was worse, and it stood between her and the man who had brought her there. Arenvale Spire ruled Caldrift the way she imagined the sun ruled the sky, from a great and burning distance. In the snow that first night, he had spoken to her as though she were the only living thing that had ever caught his interest. In his own halls he was a king, guarded and remote and forever ringed by others, and days would pass when she saw nothing of him but the back of his crowned head, at the far end of a chamber full of people who all wanted something from him. She told herself she was glad of it. She had learned exactly what it cost to let a king matter to her. She had learned it in front of 7 packs. And yet she could not keep her distance, because distance, it turned out, was the one thing the waking fire in her would not allow. They explained it to her on the 3rd day, in a high round room lined floor to ceiling with the oldest records in Caldrift, and the one who explained it was a woman named Olitha. Olitha was old in the way of stone, rather than the way of flesh, small and unbent, with eyes gone pale as wood ash, and a memory that reached back further than any book on her shelves. She was the keeper of the dragon line, the one who held the names and the bloodlines and the long grim history of what the two peoples had done to one another. And when Nerys was brought before her, the old woman went very still, and reached out one dry hand, and laid it flat against the center of Nerys's chest, without troubling to ask leave. "Ah," Oletha said on a long breath, "so he was right. Of course he was right. He is tiresomely often right." She took her hand away and looked at Nerys with something caught between pity and wonder. "Do you know what you are carrying, child?" "No one here will give me a plain answer," Nerys said. "Then here is one." Olitha lowered herself into a chair by the brazier and gestured for Nerys to sit across from her. "A long time ago, further back than your keeps count, the two lines were not always enemies. And where they were not enemies they were, once or twice, something warmer. Those joinings were rare, and they were hidden, for both peoples named them shameful, and the children of them were hidden too, or given away or left at gates and seasons no one likes to speak of." Her pale eyes did not leave Nerys's face. "The fire in such a child sleeps. Sometimes it sleeps a whole life long, and the child dies never once knowing. But if ever that child stops folding herself down small, if ever she stands straight and takes up the room that is rightly hers, the sleeping thing feels the air move, and it wakes, and it begins to climb." Nerys pressed her hand to her breastbone, where the coal had not gone cool in 4 days. "And when it reaches the top," she said, "what happens then?" Olitha was quiet for a moment. The brazier hissed between them. "That depends entirely on whether you have learned to carry it," she said. "Fire that is carried becomes warmth and light and a great many useful things besides. Fire that is not carried becomes only fire. It does not hate you. It does not mean you any harm, it simply burns, because burning is the whole of what it knows, and it will burn its way out of you as readily as out of a dry field in high summer." She leaned forward, and the firelight moved in the deep lines of her face. "The Dragon King studies it in you. You will have felt that much already. Near him it banks and waits. Away from him it climbs the faster. That is why you cannot make the distance you would dearly like to make from a man you have every reason under heaven to distrust. It is not sentiment, whatever the court chooses to whisper. It is the plain arithmetic of staying alive." So that was the shape of it, Nerys thought. She had traded one keep that owned her for one mountain that owned her, and one king whose nearness had ruled the whole of her life, for another king whose nearness now ruled her very body, and she was so bone-tired of being a thing that other people's power simply happened to. "How long?" she asked. "How long before I have to know how to carry it?" Wolitha's pale gaze moved only once, to the narrow window and the sky beyond it, where the moon was already climbing pale and swollen toward its full, and when the old woman looked back, the curiosity had gone out of her face entirely. "She looked afraid you have until the moon comes full," Olitha said. "No longer. By my reckoning that is 18 nights. Perhaps 19 if the weather turns and hides her a while." Nerys looked from the old woman to the swollen pale disk riding above the window, and then back again. "You will forgive me," she said, "if I do not yet understand why the moon should have any opinion at all about the state of my insides." Something that was nearly a smile touched Olitha's mouth. "Sharp," she said, "even frightened. Good. You will have need of it." She set her dry hands flat upon her knees. "The fire in you woke 4 nights past, in the snow, when the Dragon King found you. Awaking is not a small thing. It is a door thrown open, that was meant to stay shut, and everything behind that door begins to come forward at once, and it comes the faster, the nearer the moon draws to full, for the full moon pulls upon the blood of every creature that carries more than one nature within it. You are a wolf, and you are also a dragon, and the moon will pull upon both of you at once. On the night she comes full, all of it will crest together. And, if I have not learned to hold it by then, Neris said, though the coal beneath her ribs had already begun to answer for her. Then it will crest with nowhere to go, Aletha said simply, and it will go out of you the only way it knows. You will burn, not a little of you, the whole of you, and a good deal of whatever happens to be standing near you at the time. Neris was quiet a moment. The brazier ticked and settled. How many before me, she asked. Learned to hold it in time. The old woman's pale eyes did not waver. In 4 generations, none. The hidden children were hidden too well. They woke alone in villages that had no idea what walked among them, and they were mourned as fevers, or as fires that started from no cause anyone could name. You are the first in living memory to wake within reach of a fire old enough and strong enough to steady your own. That is either the greatest fortune of your life, child, or the cruelest joke the world has yet played on you, and I confess I cannot always tell the two apart. Then why? Neris said. Would he trouble himself with me at all? A king does not ride out alone into another realm's forest on the night of its choosing to catch one falling stranger. He does not house his oldest enemy's cast-off girl in his own mountain and set his own fire to the steadying of hers. What is it that the Dragon King wants? Aletha was a long time in answering. You will have to ask him that, she said at last. And I do not think he will tell you, for I do not think he has yet told himself. But I will say this much, since you are to spend your nights with your hands laid over his. There was a time, long before you were born, when this mountain held a great many more of us than it holds now. It holds fewer, with every winter that passes. Arenvile Spire has watched the fire go out of his people one hearth at a time for the whole of his reign, and he has not been able to stop it, and a man who cannot save his own will sometimes go to strange and foolish lengths to save the one life that happens to wander across his path. Do not mistake it for tenderness. Do not mistake it for nothing either. It is a good deal more complicated than either of those, and so, I begin to suspect, are you, there it was again. The thing Neris had walked into the snow to be free of. She had sworn, somewhere past the last torch of Dunhollow, with the roar of another woman's naming still ringing in her ears, that she would never again arrange her survival around a man who wore a crown. She had held that vow for the length of exactly 4 days. The Dragon King, she said, and could not keep the flatness from it. You are telling me that I live or I die according to how near I am willing to stand to him. I am telling you the truth, which is a different and less flattering thing than what you would like to hear. Aletha rose, joints cracking like green wood. His fire called yours out of its long sleep. Only his fire is old enough to fold. Yours back down and teach it to lie quiet when it must. We call the work the tempering. It is done at night when the pull is strongest, night upon night, until the fire learns the shape of a hand that will not let it run wild. Begin tomorrow. Do not waste the nights you have. There are not so very many of them. Neris returned to the chamber they had given her high in the warm flank of the mountain, and she did not sleep. And it was as well that she did not, because a little past the deepest hour of the night, the coal beneath her ribs turned over hard as though something had reached down and blown across it. She came awake all at once. The room was too bright. Her own 2 hands, lying open upon the coverlet, were glowing from within like glass held over a candle, the light of them moving under the skin in slow gold veins. And where her fingers had rested the wool of the coverlet had gone brown and was beginning, very quietly, to smoke. She sat up slowly, and the light came up with her, pouring off her hands and her bare arms, and when she looked down at herself, off the skin above her heart, where the glow burned brightest of all, and moved in slow, deep pulses, like a thing drawing breath. The air over her palms had begun to shimmer, the way it had shimmered over the snow the night the Dragon King found her. One thread of smoke rose from the coverlet, and then a second beside it, and the smell of scorched wool filled the little room. And still the light climbed, patient and terrible, brighter by the moment, as though it had waited the whole of her life for someone to leave a door open. Nerys did not scream. The habit of silence went deeper in her than the fear ever had, and she did not give the fear a voice now. She only lay there in the light of her own burning hands, and understood, with a cold that even the fire could not touch, that whatever this was, she could not carry it one single night alone. They began the following night, in a low, round room deep in the mountain, where the walls were bare stone, and there was nothing in reach that could catch and burn. Arryn was already there when they brought her in. He had put off the crown and the dark coat of state, and without them he looked less like the fear that wolves were raised on, and more like a man who had not been at ease in a very long while. He stood on the far side of a wide iron brazier, in which no fire had been lit, and he watched her cross to him with that same complete and unafraid attention. And Nerys made herself meet it, because she had decided somewhere in the long, bright terror of the night before, that if her life was to depend upon this man, she would at least not spend it looking at the floor. "Oletha will have told you what this is," he said. "She told me it is called the tempering," Nerys said. "She did not trouble to tell me it would be pleasant, which I take to mean it will not be." The corner of his mouth moved. "No," he agreed, "it will not." He held out his hands over the cold brazier, palms up. "Give me your hands. Do not close them, whatever you feel. The fire reads a closed hand as a fist, and it will answer a fist the only way fire knows." She laid her hands over his, without letting them touch, the way one holds a hand over a hearth, to judge the heat, and the heat came. It rose off his open palms in a slow, steady tide, and where it met the coal beneath her ribs, the coal leaned toward it the way a plant leans, the whole of a long day, toward a window, helpless and certain and entirely beyond her asking. "Now let it come up," Arryn said low. "Do not push it and do not fight it, only let it come up as far as your hands, and I will hold it there. That is all tonight is, teaching it that it may rise, and that it need not run." "And if it will not be taught," she said, "then we teach it again tomorrow," he said, "and the night after that, until it is taught, or until we run out of nights. I would not advise dwelling on the second of those. Fire has no patience for a frightened keeper. Breathe, wolf, slowly. It takes its steadiness from yours, and just now yours is nowhere to be found." Nerys breathed. She fixed her eyes on the dark line of his collar and made herself breathe, and she thought, absurdly, that of all the ways she had pictured her life ending on the night she walked out of Dunhollow into the snow, standing in the belly of a strange mountain, teaching her own blood not to burn her alive, had not once been among them. It was not gentle. The fire came up her arms like something clawing toward air after a long time drowned, and it hurt, and every instinct she owned told her to shut her hands and shove it back down, and she did not, because he had asked her not to, and because his own hands beneath hers never once wavered. No matter how the gold light spilled up out of her and pooled between their palms, he held it. She felt him hold it, felt his fire close around hers the way a larger hand closes around a smaller one that has grabbed at something hot, firm and certain, and without any fear at all. And slowly, slowly, the clawing thing in her stopped clawing and simply burned, warm and bright and going nowhere. And in the moment their fire truly touched, palm to palm, she fell. She was somewhere else. She was standing in a great high roost of pale stone, under a sky gone the color of a bruise, and the stone was burning, not warming. Burning, the way stone should never burn, running molten at the edges, and the heat of it was a grief so total that she staggered under the weight of a sorrow that was not her own. Somewhere in the smoke, a younger voice, raw and breaking, was crying out a name, over and over, a name she did not know, torn out of him the way a root is torn out of the ground. Then it was gone. She was back in the low round room with her hands full of quiet gold, and Oren had wrenched his palms out from under hers and stepped back, and the ease had gone out of him entirely. He was staring at her, and for the first time since the snow, the Dragon King of Cauldrift looked afraid of what stood in front of him. "What did you see?" he said. It was not a question, it was a door being shut. Nerys lowered her cooling hands. "Fire," she said carefully. "A place, all of stone, burning, and someone calling a name." Something crossed his face that she had no name for and would not soon forget. Then the shutters came down over it, and the king came back into him like a tide coming in, and he turned from her toward the door. "That is enough for tonight," he said. "To the room. To Olitha. To anyone but her. The wolf did well. We continue tomorrow." And he was gone. Olitha had not stirred from her stool in the corner. She was watching the door he had gone through with an expression Nerys could not begin to read. "You saw something," the old woman said. "It was not a question either. A burning," Nerys said. "A place all of pale stone, and a name I did not know, and a grief so large I could not stand under the whole of it." Olitha closed her eyes for a moment, as though a thing she had long suspected had just been confirmed, and gave her no pleasure in the confirming. "The tempering runs in both directions, child, though he will not have thought to warn you of it, for he did not believe there was anything left in him for a fire to carry across. It seems he was wrong about that, as he is wrong about very little else." She rose on her cracking joints. "Say nothing of what you saw, not to him, not to me, not to the walls of this mountain. There are fires a person chooses to bank alone, and it is no kindness at all to go digging in the ash of them uninvited." When the old woman had gone as well, Nerys stood alone in the round room with the last of the gold fading out of her hands, and understood that she had just seen a thing the Dragon King had shown to no living soul, and that he would have given a great deal for her not to have seen it at all. The nights folded one into another after that, and the moon climbed, and a strange new shape came into Nerys's life that she had not asked for and could not quite bring herself to resent. They met each night in the low, round room, and each night the tempering came a little easier, the fire rising to her hands and lying quiet there under the steady press of his. And each night, when it was done, they did not at once part. It began with a question. She asked him on the 5th night how a person was meant to carry a thing all day that woke every muscle in the body when it rose, and instead of the king's flat courtesy she had braced for, he answered her plainly, and then he asked her a question in turn, and somewhere in the answering of it an hour went by that neither of them had meant to give away. He was not warm in the manner of ordinary men. He had been the most feared thing in the north for the whole of his life, and it had taught him to stand always a little apart, to let a room fill and never quite fill it himself. And Nerys knew that particular trick of standing down to the bone because she had spent her own life performing its opposite, making herself so small that a room could forget she was in it at all. They were, she began to see, two answers to the same cruel question. The world had looked at her and seen a thing too low to matter. The world had looked at him and seen a thing too dangerous to love. Neither of them had ever once been simply looked at and seen. The kindnesses, when they came without announcement. She noticed on the 6th night that the round room had been hung with furs against the cold, that dragons did not feel, but wolves did, and no one said a word about it, and she did not thank him, because she understood by then that thanks would only make him leave the room. On the 8th night the late meal was brought to them, and it was not the fare of the dragon court, but the plain heavy food of Ilmore, barley and root and dark bread, the food of the under kitchens where she had been raised. She looked at the plate, then at him. Oren looked steadily at the wall as though it were of tremendous interest, the tips of his ears faintly bright, and Neris had to look down at her hands to keep her face in order. "You had this made," she said. "I had a great many things made," he said. "I am a king. Things are always being made." "You had barley bread made," she said, "in the roost of the dragon line, where I would wager barley bread has not been served in 100 years. "Eat your supper, wolf," he said, with great dignity, and she laughed, and the sound of it startled them both, and the coal in her chest flared up bright and sudden and warm, so that gold light spilled across the table for the space of a heartbeat before she caught it. He was watching her when the light faded. "It answers your gladness," he said quietly, as though the discovery cost him something. "I have never seen it answer gladness before. Only fear, only grief. In all the fires I have known, yours is the first I have seen leap for a good reason." "That is a very sad thing to say," Neris told him, "and you said it as though you were remarking upon the weather. I am told I say most things that way." He turned the cup in his hand without drinking from it. "It is a habit of the very feared. If you never once let them hear that a thing has moved you, they cannot use the moving of you against you afterward. You will have your own form of it, I expect. The wolf who takes up no room, the dragon who feels nothing at all. We are neither of us telling the truth, and we have each been telling the lie so long that we have half come to believe it ourselves." Neris was quiet a moment. The fire caught whatever moved in her anyway, and threw a low warm light across the stone between them. "In the keep," she said slowly, "there was an old cook who used to tell me I was the most useful girl in all of Ilmar and the least trouble, and she meant it as the very kindest thing a person could say to another, and I let her, because being useful and being no trouble were the only two doors I had ever been shown. It did not once occur to me in all those years that there might be a third door somewhere that no one had bothered to point out." "And is there?" Irene said. "I do not know yet," Neris said. "Honestly. I am scarcely a fortnight out of the only life I was ever handed. Ask me again when I have gone a full night without nearly setting the bedclothes alight." He laughed. It was a startled, rusty sound, the sound of a thing long unused, and it did more to her than any kindness he had yet buried in a plate of barley bread, because she understood all at once that she was very likely the first living person in years to have surprised it out of him. She wanted to ask him then about the burning place of pale stone, and the name torn out of a younger voice in the smoke. She had wanted to ask for 8 nights. But she had learned the shape of him well enough by now to know that if she reached for that door, he would close every door in the mountain. So instead she said, lightly, "And what does yours leap for, Your Majesty?" "Anything at all, or has it forgotten how?" The ease did not leave him this time. He only looked at her across the low gold light for a long moment, and something in his face gave way. Not all of it, but a hinge of it. "It had forgotten," he said. "I had thought it had forgotten for good." He did not finish the thought. He did not have to. The unfinished half of it hung in the warm air between them, and Neris felt her own fire lean toward him the way it always did, and for the first time she did not entirely blame the moon for the pull of it. The moon was very nearly full now. 3 nights, Aletha had said that morning, her face grim. 3 nights, and Neris could feel the truth of it in her blood, a tightening, a gathering, the coal beneath her ribs, no longer a coal, but something closer to a banked forge waiting on a bellows. And yet on that night, sitting close in the fur-hung room, with the man the whole of her people had taught her to dread, she was not thinking of the moon at all. She was thinking of how near his hand had come to hers on the stone bench, and how she had not moved hers away. He turned his head. She turned hers. The distance between them had become, without either of them deciding it, no distance worth the name, and then the horns began. They came up from the gate towers far below, 3 long notes, and a 4th, the call that Caldrift raised only for an armed company at its threshold, and under it, faint and unmistakable, even at that height, the deep belling howl of wolves. Alren was on his feet before the 4th note died, the king slamming back down over the man so fast it was as though the man had never been there at all. A shield captain named Vessa was already in the doorway, breathless, her face hard. "Wolves, my lord," she said. "A company under a white banner and a grey wolf standard. They are asking, in the old form, for parley." Her eyes cut to Neris, and away. "They say the Alpha King of Ilmar has ridden the whole of the way himself, and that he will not leave without what was taken from him." Neris went down to the gate herself, and she would not be argued out of it. Vessa protested the whole length of the stair, and Doreen said nothing at all, which was somehow worse. His silence, a wall she could feel the shape of, without seeing over the top of it. At the last turning before the gate court, he caught her arm, not hard, only enough to halt her. "You do not have to stand in front of him," he said. "Whatever he has come to say, he can say it to me." "He did not ride the whole of the way to Caldriff to speak with you," Neris said. "He came for a thing he believes belongs to him. I should like him to see, with his own two eyes, exactly how wrong he is about who it is that I belong to." She looked at his hand upon her arm until he let it fall. "You, of all the men in the north, should understand the wanting to be seen." The gate court was full of torchlight and of breath steaming in the cold. A company of wolves stood in the snow beyond the raised portcullis under a white parley banner and the grey wolf standard of Ilmer, and at the head of them, bareheaded and travel-worn, stood Tallis Ironmore. She had wondered, in the safe distance of the mountain, what it might feel like to look at him again. Now she knew. It felt like nothing at all. It felt like looking at a house she had once lived in, and could no longer quite remember being warm inside. He, for his part, looked as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Neris! Her name came out of him low and stunned, and stripped of all its guard. His eyes moved over her, over the gold that lived beneath her skin now, over the way she stood straight and filled the whole of the space that was hers to fill. "What has he done to you?" "He has done nothing to me," she said. "That has been rather the novelty of it. You do not know what you are standing beside." Tallis stepped forward, to the very edge of the torchlight, and the wolves behind him shifted and did not follow. "You do not know what he is. Come back with me tonight, and there is still a chance I can undo what your leaving has begun. Stay, and I cannot answer for what follows, for you or for either of our peoples." "You named another woman, Luna, in front of the 7 packs, Neris said, "and you stood and watched me walk out of your hall into the snow, and you did not once call after me. And now you have crossed a winter and a border, to tell me that you cannot answer for what follows." She tilted her head. "Tell me, Tallis, when exactly did I become worth the trouble?" Something broke across his face. "You were always worth the trouble," he said very quietly. "That was never the difficulty. The difficulty was what they would have done to you had you stayed one more night under my roof. There were those in Dunhollow who knew what your blood carried before you knew it yourself. Under pack law, a dragon-blooded thing found among us is not exiled, Neris. It is put down. I named Marin so that every eye in that hall would follow her and not you, so that you would be forgotten and small and safe, so that you would walk out unwatched and live." His hands had closed into fists. "I could not stand for you openly. It would have split the pack and started a war within our own gates. So I chose the crown, and I told myself I chose it for you, and I have not slept a whole night since." For a moment, the old wound in her turned over hard, because there it was, the thing she had ached a winter to hear, the proof that she had mattered, after all. And then she looked at it clearly, the way Olitha had taught her to look at fire, and she saw it for exactly what it was. "You could have stood for me and lost your crown," she said, "and you chose your crown and called it my safety. That is not a sacrifice, Tallis. That is a man keeping the thing he wanted most and handing the cost of it to someone smaller. I know the shape of that bargain very well. I have been the smaller person in it my whole life." His silence was its own answer. It was then that the fire came up in her. She did not call it. It rose all on its own out of the grief and the anger and the terrible cold clarity of the moment, and gold light spilled up her arms and out across the snow, and every wolf in the company recoiled with a low sound of fear, and Tallis Ironmore went the color of ash, because whatever he had suspected, he was now seeing confirmed in the snow before his own people. "So it is true," he whispered. "It is true," Neris said, and she made herself hold the fire steady, made it bank and wait, and the doing of it in front of him was the proudest moment of her life. "Go home, Tallis. There is nothing here that was ever yours." "If you stay," Tallis said, and his voice had gone quiet and ragged, "the Pax will name it exactly what it appears to be. A dragon-blooded wolf, raised inside Ilmar, crowned in the enemy's own colors. They will call it the proof of everything they have always feared, and they will want a war to show that they were right to fear it, and I do not know that I will be able to hold them back from it. Then do not try to stop a war by dragging me back into a cage," Neris said. "Try to stop it the way brave men are meant to, out loud, at a table, with your own name spoken plainly against it." She watched the words go home, and she watched him find no answer for them, because bravery spoken out loud had always been the one coin Tallis Ironmore could not bring himself to spend. He looked at her, a long moment. Then his gaze moved past her, to where Oren stood in the shadow of the gate, and his mouth twisted. "You think that one will keep you safe," he said. "His fire could not save his own sister. It could not save one single stone of Sarn. Ask him, Wolf, before you trust your life to his hands. Ask the Dragon King what his fire is good for." He turned his company in the snow and rode into the dark, and Neris stood in the fading gold of her own light. And she did not watch him go, because she had turned to look at Oren, and what she saw in the Dragon King's face was that every word of it was true. He would not speak of it. She followed him up through the mountain that night, and she asked him plainly, in the round room where they had spent so many nights, learning the shape of one another's fire, what had happened at Sarn, and who Senna had been. For she had heard the name at last, in Tallis's mouth, and matched it to the name torn out of the smoke in her vision. And Oren, who had held her fire in his open hands night after night without once flinching, would not so much as look at her. "It is not a thing I discuss," he said. "You have held the whole of me in your hands," Neris said. "You have seen my fire leap for gladness, and you have seen it try to burn me alive. You have fed me the bread of a keep you have never set foot in. Do not tell me that we are two people who do not discuss things." That was the tempering. He said it flatly, and she watched the wall come up in him, stone by stone. The same wall she had felt at the head of the stair. The tempering ends when the moon comes full. It comes full in 3 nights. After that, you will have no more need of me, and I would, as soon we did not pretend otherwise. The cruelty of it took her breath, and then she understood it, because she had wielded the very same cruelty herself once, in a hall full of firelight, telling a cook she was the most useful and least troublesome girl in Ilmar. It was the cruelty of a person, shutting a door, before someone else can shut it, on them. "You are sending me away," she said, slowly, "for my own good, because you have decided." She laughed, and there was no warmth in it. "Do you know, you and Tallis Ironmore are more alike than either of you would ever bear to hear. You are both so very certain that the kindest thing you can do for me is to choose it without me." "Tallis Ironmore threw you into the snow," Oren said low. "Yes," Neris said. "And you are about to do precisely the same, and tell yourself it is different because your snow is warmer." He turned from her, and he went out, and the door of the round room shut behind him, and for the second time in a single winter, Neris found herself alone, in a warm room that a king had walked out of. It came for her within the hour. Without the steady press of his fire against hers, the thing beneath her ribs began at once to climb, and this time there was no hand to fold it back down. By the deep of the night her skin had gone hot to the touch, and the water in the ewer by her bed had begun to steam. By the following day, she could not hold a cup without the clay of it cracking. She could not weep, for the tears dried to salt on her lashes before ever they fell. She could not sleep, for sleep was where the fire climbed the fastest, and twice she woke with the bedposts charred and the smell of scorched linen thick in the dark. And somewhere across the mountain, Vessa told her grimly, the Dragon King fared no better, for a joined fire torn in two does not harm only the smaller half of it. He had not left his chambers. He had not eaten. His own flame, denied the thing it had spent all those nights learning to lean toward, had begun to gutter and flare in ways that frightened even the dragons who had served him the whole of their lives. Olitha came and sat with her and pressed cool cloths to her brow that dried to nothing in moments, and her old face was grim. The tempering is a shared fire now, the old woman said. You cannot bank it alone any more than he can, though he is too proud and too frightened to admit that the door swings both ways. The moon comes full tonight, child. If you have not learned to carry the crest by the time she rises, you will not learn it at all. And Neris, burning in her bed, understood the true shape of her low point with a clarity that even the fire could not scorch. She had spent her whole life being the one who was left. Left at a gate as an infant. Left in a hall as a woman. And now, left in a warm room by the one man who had ever looked at her and seen a sovereign instead of a servant, and the leaving was going to kill her. And she found she was less afraid of the dying than of the terrible old familiar proof that she was after all a thing that everyone eventually set down. She lay in the heat of her own body, and counted the leavings of her life, the way another person might count sheep to sleep. The gate she had been left at, in a bad season. The hall she had been named past. The round room he had walked out of not a day ago. It was a short and terrible list, and it all said the very same thing. And the worst of it was that the fire agreed. It fed on the grief and grew fat on it, the way fire always agrees with the cruelest thing a person believes about themselves. That, Neris understood at last, was the true danger of the crest, and Olitha had never quite said it aloud. It was not only the heat, it was that the fire would take whatever lie you believed most deeply about your own worth, and it would burn you down along the line of it. She would not be that thing. Not again. Not even to save herself. She rose from the bed on legs that would barely hold her, and she pulled a cloak over her burning shoulders, and she went out into the freezing dark of the mountain, because if her fire was going to crest with nowhere to go, she would not let it take the roost and its people down with her the way another fire had once taken Sarn. She would carry it out into the snow, alone, and she would burn where she could harm no one, and it would be, she thought bitterly, as the cold bit at her, the single most useful and least troublesome thing she had ever done. He found her at the mountain's shoulder, knee-deep in snow that hissed to steam around her, glowing like a fallen star. She did not hear him come. She only felt the heat of him reach her through the greater heat of her own burning, and then his hands were on her shoulders, turning her, and his fire came up against hers, hard and certain and unafraid, and the crest that had been climbing to take her banked, all at once under the press of it. And Neris sagged against him in the snow and wept for the sheer animal relief of not being on fire from the inside. Foolish creature, he said into her hair, and his voice was not a king's voice at all. You would have walked into the snow and burned to ash sooner than take one thing you were not offered. I know that trick. I invented it. You left, she managed. I left, he agreed. And I got as far as the fourth gate before Olitha told me you had gone out onto the mountain to die tidily, where you would trouble no one, and I understood that I had not saved you from anything. I had only done to you the exact thing that was done to me. He drew back enough to look at her, and there was no wall in him now. It had come down, all of it, in the snow. You want to know about Sarn? I will tell you about Sarn. And there in the freezing dark, with her fire banked against his, and the full moon climbing to break over them before the night was through, he told her. Sarn had been the old roost, the great pale city of his people, before his reign, when the dragon line was still many. There had been a war, wolf and dragon, both to blame for the starting of it, and the wolves had brought fire of their own to Sarn, pitch and oil and burning brands, and the pale stone that should never burn had burned. Arren had been young. His sister Senna had been younger. He had carried the strongest fire of his generation even then, and he had gone into the burning city certain, in the way only the young and the powerful are certain, that his fire made him a thing that could save them. It could not, he said. Fire cannot put out fire. I could not cool one stone. I could not breathe one breath of clean air into that smoke. I found Senna at the last, and I could not reach her through the flame, and my own fire, all that fire everyone feared me for, was worth exactly nothing, and she died calling my name, while the strongest dragon in the north stood 10 feet away and burned uselessly bright. He drew a long breath. I have believed, every day since, that my fire is good for nothing but destruction, that it draws the loving close and then fails them at the one moment loving asks anything of it. That is why my people are dying, Neris, not only the wars. It is that their king has spent 30 years too afraid of his own hands to build anything with them. Neris listened, and she felt the whole of it through the fire that bound them, the guilt that had not cooled in all the years since, the same poison she had carried in her own quieter way, and she understood that they were, as she had first come to see on the 8th night, two answers to the same cruel question. Your fire did not fail her, Neris said quietly. Your fire was never once the thing that failed her. No fire ever made could have done what that night demanded of it, and there is a world of difference between the two, though I know as well as any living soul how many years a person can spend refusing to see it. She lifted one of his hands and pressed it flat over the coal in her own chest, where his fire had banked hers 100 times over. This did not fail me. Whatever else your fire has ever done in the world, it has kept me alive and warm and whole for 18 nights running. Hold on to that one. The next time the other memory comes for you in the dark. He looked down at their joined hands, as though he had never truly seen them before. There is a way, Olitha said. Neither of them had heard her come. She stood in the snow at a little distance, rapt to the eyes, her pale gaze steady. There is a way for the wolf to survive the crest, and I will tell it to you plainly, and then I will leave the pair of you to be foolish about it in private. She looked at Neris. You can sever it. There is an old working, cruel but clean, that will put the fire back to sleep and let you live out your days an ordinary wolf, small and safe and cold, in whatever quiet corner of the world you choose. You would never burn again. You would also never again be what you have become on this mountain. That door would close for good. Her gaze did not waver. Or, you can bind your fire to his, wholly and for always, not the nightly tempering, but the true joining, and carry the crest together, and be what you are, sovereign and seen and never small again. But a joined fire cannot be unjoined, child, and you have been left by every soul who ever held you. And I will not pretend the safe door is not the safe door. The wind moved the snow between them. Neris looked at the safe door for a long moment. It was, she found, exactly the door she had been shown her whole life. Be useful, be no trouble. Be small, and cold, and unburned, and unseen. It was the only shape of safety she had ever been offered, and a part of her that had been left at a gate in a bad season would want it until the day she died. And that was exactly how she knew what her answer had to be. The safe door was the door that had been chosen for her over and over by every person who had ever decided what was best for the useful and troublesome and disposable girl. It was the small door, the cold door. The door a person walks through to spend a whole life not being burned and not being warmed and not in the end being very much of anything at all. No, she said. She turned to Aren, and she made herself say the rest of it out loud, because she had spent a lifetime not saying the things that mattered, and she was done with that now. I have been small and safe my whole life, and it was never once the same thing as being alive. I would rather burn as myself than freeze as a thing that takes up no room. Bind your fire to mine. And Aaron, who had kept every living soul at the length of his arm for 30 years for fear of what his hands would fail to save, looked at her as though she had asked him for the one thing he had sworn he would never risk giving. I cannot, he whispered. Neris, what if I fail you the way I failed her? The moon was climbing swiftly to full even now, and the door she had chosen stood open, and the one person who could walk through it with her had just told her that he would not. She did not shout at him. She had learned, on this mountain, that the loudest thing a person can do is sometimes to speak very quietly. She crossed the snow to him slowly, her own fire flaring and guttering with every unsteady step, and she did not stop until she stood close enough to feel his heat war against the cold that poured off her. He went still, the way he always went still when she came too near the thing he was guarding. Listen to me, Neris said, because I am only going to say this the once, and then I am going to be too busy either living or dying to repeat it. She took his burning hands in her burning hands there in the snow, and she did not let him look away. For 18 nights your fire has held mine. 18 nights it has kept me from burning out. It fed me. It warmed a room full of furs it did not need. It banked me when I would have taken the whole roost down, and tonight it walked out onto a freezing mountain and caught me before I fell. Tell me, Arenvelspire. Tell me to my face that a fire that has done all of that for 18 nights is good for nothing but destruction. Tell me, when I am standing here alive because of it, that your hands only fail the ones who need them. He opened his mouth, and no words came. You did not fail, Senna, she said. Gentler now. Fire cannot put out fire. You are a boy carrying a power no boy should have to carry, and you walked into a burning city for love of your sister, and the world had simply not built a fire that could do what you needed it to do. That is not a failing. That is grief, wearing the mask of a failing, because grief cannot bear to be that helpless, so it tells you it was your fault, because a fault at least is a thing you might have changed. Her voice broke, and she let it. I know that mask. I wore it, sister, my whole life. Every soul who left me, I told myself it was because I was not enough. Because a fault was easier to carry than the plain, unbearable truth that sometimes you are left, and it is not about your worth at all. The fire between their joint hands had begun very slowly to change. It was no longer two fires, banking one another. It was leaning together, gold into gold, the way it had wanted to since the first night in the snow. I am not going to leave you, Neris said. Not for your good, not for mine, not for anyone's. I have been left enough for one life. So the only question left is whether you are brave enough to be loved by something your fire cannot save from every harm in the world. Because that is what loving is, Aurine. It is not a promise that you will never fail. It is a choosing to stay close anyway. For a long moment, there was only the wind, and the snow, and the swollen moon. He made a sound then that she had not heard from him before, not the rusty laugh and not the king's flat courtesy, something rawer than either, the sound of a wall that has stood so long it has forgotten it was ever a choice, finally agreeing to be set down. From the first night in the snow, he said, I have wanted to keep you, and I called it duty, and then I called it your safety. Because wanting a thing plainly and out loud has never once ended well for me. I do not know how to promise you that I will not fail you. I have failed before, and the failing cost me everything. I am not asking you never to fail me, Neris said. I am asking you to be here when you do. Then Arenvelspire, who had held the whole world at arm's length for the whole of his life, drew her in, and he bent his head to hers, and their fires met without either of them holding the other back for the first time since the night they had found one another in the dark. What passed between them then is not the sort of thing that belongs to anyone but the two of them. But the fires joined, gold pouring into gold, his grief and her long loneliness burning together in the cold until there was no telling one flame from the other. She felt the bond settle into the center of her warm and certain and beyond any undoing. And she felt him feel it too, felt the 30-year wall in him come down. Not stone by stone, this time, but all at once. And she held him through it the way he had held her fire, without flinching, without letting go. And as the two fires became one, she felt the whole of him open to her at last. The grief worn, smooth as a river stone, the long habit of standing apart, the astonished disbelief that anyone had chosen to come this close on purpose. She felt him receive her in the very same way, down to the small cold voice that had told her the whole of her life that she was a thing to be used, and then quietly set down, and she felt that little voice meet his fire, and for the first time, find nothing there that agreed with it. When it was done, they stood joined in the snow, and Nerys felt steadier than she had felt in the whole of her burning life, carried now not by a nightly borrowing, but by a fire that was truly and forever half her own. "There," she murmured against him. That was not so very hard, was it? For the most feared creature in all the north, she felt him laugh, that rusty startled sound. "Warmer now." "It was the hardest thing I have ever done," he said. "Do not tell my court." For the length of one breath, the world was perfectly still and perfectly warm, and Nerys let herself believe, foolishly, wonderfully, that the difficult part was behind them. She turned her face up to his in the cold, and for once she did not brace herself for the thing to be taken away, because this thing could not be taken. It was hers now, half of it, burning steady in the very center of her where the old emptiness had lived, her whole life long. She thought of the girl who had walked out into the snow a winter ago, certain that she owned nothing in all the world, and she wished fiercely that she could reach back through the cold and tell her to keep walking, that there was a fire at the far end of it worth every frozen step of the way. "Whatever comes next," she said, "we carry it together." "Together," Auren agreed. And the word had the plain, unbreakable weight of a vow. Then the moon broke free of the mountain's shoulder and came full, and every drop of blood in her body answered it at once, and the true fire began to rise. It came like nothing that had come before. The nightly tempering had been a coal held in an open hand. This was a forge with the bellows thrown wide, the full moon dragging on the wolf and the dragon in her both at once, and the fire rose up through her in a great golden flood that would one night earlier, alone, have burned her to ash and taken half the mountain with her. She did not burn. She carried it. She stood in the snow with her joined fire roaring up through her toward the full white moon, and she carried the whole enormous crest of it because she was no longer trying to hold it small, and she was no longer trying to hold it alone. Auren's fire moved with hers, under hers, the way a riverbed carries a flood, and Olitha's old voice was somewhere at the edge of it all, saying, "Carry it, do not clench. Let it be as large as it truly is, and Nerys, let it be large." For the first time in her life, she let a thing about herself be exactly as large as it truly was. The fire did not tear her apart. It remade her. She felt it move out along her arms in veins of living gold, felt it pour up her spine and gather at her shoulder blades with a weight like folded wings, felt the wolf in her and the dragon in her lay down at long last the quarrel they had waged since before she was born, and become one single creature that had never once needed to choose between them. The snow for 30 paces melted to bare warm stone, the night itself went gold. And still it climbed, and still she carried it, laughing now through her tears, because the very thing she had spent a lifetime being told would destroy her, turned out to be the truest and most magnificent part of her, and it had only ever been waiting for her to stop apologizing for the size of it. And as the fire reached its terrible height, it pulled the two of them, joined as they were, down into the place she had glimpsed on the very first night of the tempering, the pale roost. Sarn, burning. But this time, she was not a startled witness falling into a vision. This time, she walked into the smoke on her own 2 feet, with Oren's hand fast in hers, because she understood now that this was the true crest, the real trial, not the fire in her body, but the fire in his memory, the wound that had kept his own flame. If they were to carry the crest, they would have to carry this. Senna was there in the smoke, as she had been every night of his life, a girl younger than Neris, with Oren's own eyes, calling a name into the flames. Oren's hand shook in hers. "I cannot," he said. "I have never once been able to reach her." "You are not reaching her to save her," Neris said. "It is 30 years too late to save her, and it was never yours to do. You are reaching her to say goodbye." She turned him to face the girl in the smoke. "Look at her, Oren, not at your fault. At her. Say the thing you have never let yourself say." For a long moment, he could not. And then the Dragon King of Caldrift, the most feared fire in the north, went down on his knees in the smoke of his oldest grief, and reached out to the sister he had carried unburied for 30 years. Neris did not let go of his other hand. She could not walk this last stretch for him. She knew that now, no more than he had been able to walk the crest of the fire for her. But she could stand in the smoke at his side, so that for the first time in 30 years, he did not have to face it entirely alone. And she understood in that moment that this was the whole of what they had been building toward, night upon night, with their hands full of borrowed fire. Not a cure for the grief. There was no cure, only a companion for the dark. "I am sorry," he said, and his voice broke entirely. "I am sorry, I could not reach you. I have told myself so long that it was my failing, because a failing meant there was something I might have done, and I could not bear that there was nothing. But there was nothing, Senna, there was nothing anyone could have done. And I have let that lie keep me from every warm thing since, and I do not think you would have wanted that. I do not think you would have wanted your brother to spend the rest of his life too frightened of his own hands to hold anything at all." The girl in the smoke looked at him. And then, slowly, she smiled. The way the dead smile in the moment we finally give them leave to go. And the smoke began to thin, and the burning pale stone of Sarne cooled and faded and was, at long last, only a memory, and no longer a cage. Neris felt the change move through the joined fire like a great knot coming loose. His flame, freed of the weight it had dragged for 30 years, leapt up bright and clean, and hers leapt with it, and together they carried the last of the crest up and out, and let it go, into the night sky, over Caldrift, in a great silent bloom of gold that every soul in the mountain woke to see and would speak of for the rest of their lives. Vesa would tell it, in the years that came after, as the night the sky over Caldrift caught fire and did not burn, the night the old king's grief went up in one clean flame and came back down as light. Olitha would set it in the long records in her cramped and ancient hand. The first waking survived in 4 full generations, and beside it, in smaller letters, she permitted herself a word she did not often allow onto the page, which was hope. When it was over, they were kneeling together in the snow under an ordinary full moon, and the fire in Neris had gone quiet at last, banked and steady, and wholly hers to carry. She had survived the crest. She was so far as Olitha's long memory reached, the first of her kind in 4 generations to do it. But that was not the thing that undid her, kneeling there in the melting snow. The thing that undid her was Oren's face, lit gold in the last of the light, looking at her not as a thing his fire had failed to save, nor as a thing too dangerous to love, but simply and wholly as she was, and being for the first time in either of their lives, looked at in the very same way in return. The curse of a grief is that it does not lift all at once, and neither of them pretended otherwise. The dragons of Caldrift did not become many again in a season. Oren still woke some nights with Sarnen in his eyes, and on those nights Neris did not try to talk him out of the dark, She only stayed in it with him until it passed, which she had learned was a different and better thing. But he built now, with the hands he had feared the whole of his life. Under a king who was no longer frightened of his own fire, the mountain began, slowly, to warm back into life. Nerys learned to rule, which surprised no one more than herself. It turned out that a lifetime spent being invisible had taught her to see everything, and a court full of people who had been raised to fear her fire found, to its bewilderment, that it had acquired a sovereign who noticed the servant in the corner clutching the water pitcher and asked her name. She was wolf and she was dragon, the only creature in the north who was wholly both. And so when at last the 7 packs and the Dragon King were brought to one table to end the long, slow war between them, it was Nerys who sat at the joining of it, belonging at last not to no place, but to both. Which is how she came to be standing in the great parley hall at Greywater. One winter after she had walked out of another hall into the snow, dressed in the true deep gold of her own fire, when the doors opened, and Tallis Ironmore looked up and forgot how to breathe. She felt the whole hall turn. She felt Tallis's eyes move over her, over the crown that was hers, by right of what she had survived, over the Dragon King, standing easy at her side. She saw the moment he understood, fully and finally, the size of the thing his cowardice had handed away. He came to her later, when the formal words were done, and he stood before her with a whole winter of sleeplessness in his face. "Nerys," he said, "if I had known what you would become, you would have kept me," she finished for him, not unkindly. "I know. That is the whole of the difference between us, Tallis. You would have kept me for what I became." He stood in the snow and chose me for what I was, when I was a burning nobody with nothing, and could not yet see one reason on earth why anyone should. She inclined her head, the courtesy one sovereign grants another, and not one hair beyond it. "Go home. Rule well, be braver with the next one than you were with me." And she turned from him, and this time the turning cost her nothing at all. That night, high in the warm heart of the mountain, it was Oren who could not sleep, and it was Nerys he came to in the dark, and she did not make herself small to make room for him. She simply opened her arms and let the warmth of her own banked fire fill the whole of the space that was hers. She had once walked out of a warm hall into the freezing dark, taking up no room in the world at all, certain she was a thing that everyone eventually set down. She would never do that again. She settled the King of Dragons against her, where the firelight could reach him, and she felt him go heavy and easy and unafraid, and she let her own eyes drift closed, warm through and through, chosen, seen, and entirely done with being small.